Hey guys, tonight we're going to imagine a scenario so peculiar, so surreal, it feels more like a fable than a scientific thought experiment. We're going to lie back and let our minds wander into a world where a million tiny arachnids, a million ticks, suddenly find their way onto your skin. It's a strange, almost comically horrifying image, isn't it? A single tick is a nuisance, a small dot of worry you brush off after a walk in the woods. But a million, that's not a nuisance. It's an event horizon, a biological tide. And in this gentle exploratory journey, we're going to treat it as such, not as a horror, but as an opportunity to understand our own biology, our own resilience in a way we never could otherwise. We are going to treat this almost certain death with the detached curiosity of a scientist and the poetic wonder of a storyteller. The truth is, you almost certainly would not survive. But the beauty of the mind is that we can journey to places the body cannot. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you are, what time it is, and we'll begin our quiet, curious adventure. The very first moment is a whisper, a silent symphony of 1 million tiny travelers arriving on the shores of your skin. It's not the sharp singular bite of a bee, but a multitude of soft touches, a sensation that might at first feel like static electricity or a sudden gust of wind carrying a million dandelion seeds. But these are not seeds. They are living things, each one carrying an instinct older than our own species. They are driven by an ancient genetic imperative to find a host, to find a meal, to find life. And in this moment, you are that life. Imagine your skin not as a single uniform sheet, but as a vast, living continent. It has its own topography, its own ecosystems of bacteria and oils, its own gentle hum of metabolic activity. This continent is suddenly colonized. The first few hundred ticks latch on with their barbed mouthparts, a process that is both intricate and surprisingly elegant from a purely biological perspective. A tick's mouth is a marvel of evolutionary engineering. It's not a simple needle, it's a toolkit. There's a central harpoon-like structure called the hypostome covered in backward-facing barbs that anchor the tick firmly in place. Flanking this are two chelicerae blade-like appendages that saw through the skin, creating a tiny wound. As they work, they secrete a cocktail of chemicals from their salivary glands. This is where the story truly begins. The core scientific concept we're exploring here is the body's innate immune response. This is your first line of defense, the soldiers at the gate. As the first tick punctures the skin, a cascade of events is triggered at a cellular level. Mast cells, tiny sentinels scattered throughout the connective tissues, detect the foreign invasion. They release histamine, a powerful signaling molecule. Histamine is a call to arms. It causes the tiny blood vessels in the area to dilate and become more permeable, allowing more blood flow and immune cells to rush to the scene. This is why a mosquito bite swells and itches. It's a sign of a localized battle in progress. But with a million ticks, the call to arms isn't localized. It's a roar that echoes across the entire continent of your skin. The sheer scale of this histamine release would be catastrophic. It would be like every single fire alarm in a city, going off at once, not just in one building, but in every single building everywhere. The widespread vasodilation would cause a massive drop in blood pressure, a condition known as distributive shock. Your body's finely tuned pressure system, which keeps blood flowing to your organs, would simply collapse. But the ticks aren't just passive invaders. Their saliva is a masterpiece of deception and manipulation. It contains a dizzying array of proteins and enzymes designed to subvert your defenses. There are anti-inflammatory compounds to dull the redness and swelling, and immunomodulatory proteins to confuse and suppress your immune cells. They are like master spies, slipping past the guards by convincing them there is no threat at all. The tick's goal is not to kill you immediately, but to feed for an extended period, so it needs to ensure its presence is as unnoticed as possible. The irony, of course, is that a million of them could never go unnoticed. This brings us to a strange, almost unknown scientific fact. Some species of ticks can induce a condition known as alpha-gal syndrome, a meat allergy. This is a very peculiar and specific response. The tick's saliva contains a sugar molecule called alpha-gal, which is a common sugar found in most mammals, but not in humans, apes, and a few other primates. When a tick carrying alpha-gal from a previous mammalian host bites a human, our immune system can sometimes recognize this sugar as a foreign invader and mount an allergic response. The human body then begins to produce antibodies against alpha-gal. The next time that person eats red meat, beef, pork, or lamb, which also contains alpha-gal, the antibodies trigger a severe allergic reaction. The strange part is that this allergy is often delayed, sometimes occurring hours after eating the meat. It's a biological time bomb, a lingering echo of a brief unnoticed encounter. In our scenario with 1,000,000 ticks, the amount of alpha-gal introduced would be immense, almost certainly causing an immediate and catastrophic anaphylactic shock, a systemic allergic reaction that would further compound the distributive shock. Your airways would tighten, your blood pressure would plummet, and your body would be fighting an enemy it couldn't even see. So as we drift deeper into this thought experiment, we find ourselves at the intersection of a physical assault and a chemical war. 1,000,000 ticks isn't just about 1,000,000 bites. It's about 1,000,000 miniature biological laboratories, all injecting their specialized cocktails into your system at once. They are bypassing your outer defenses and beginning to wage war from within. The sensory experience would be almost unimaginable. The millions of tiny anchors, the constant sawing of the chelicerae, the chemical haze spreading through your tissues. It would be a sensory overload, unlike anything a human has ever experienced. But the true danger, the real existential threat, lies not in the feeling of it, but in the unseen molecular machinations. This raises an interesting and profound question. What is the true nature of pain? Is it simply a signal? A physiological warning from our nervous system? Or is it something more, a subjective, complex experience shaped by memory, expectation, and the sheer scale of the event? If 1,000,000 ticks bite you, is the total pain simply the sum of 1,000,000 individual bites? Or does it become something else entirely, a new indescribable state of being? The truth is, we don't really know for sure. The human brain, a theater of consciousness, has never had to stage a performance of this magnitude. It's a mystery that remains unsolved, a blank page in the book of human experience. Our journey has just begun, and already we've seen the beginning of the end. The silent symphony of self is already being overwhelmed. The gentle river of blood is about to be turned to chaos. In the next part of our story, we will dive deeper into this chaotic river, exploring the chemical warfare the ticks are waging and the desperate failing attempts of your body to maintain order. We'll examine the fascinating, terrible process by which these tiny creatures manipulate your blood to their own ends. But for now, let's just listen to the sound of those 1,000,000 tiny travelers, a rustling on a vast living continent that is slowly beginning to change forever. The whispers of those 1,000,000 tiny travelers have now turned into a deafening silence. It's a silence not of absence, but of overwhelming presence. Their saliva, a complex and nefarious brew, has begun its work in earnest. We imagined the bloodstream as a gentle flowing river in the last section, a serene waterway of life. Now, we must see it for what it is, becoming a scene of quiet chemical chaos. The ticks' goal is simple: to make that river not just a place to drink, but a place to live. And to do that, they must change the river itself. The core scientific concept we're exploring here is the intricate process of hemostasis, or blood clotting. Our blood is designed with a brilliant emergency system. When a vessel is damaged, platelets, tiny cell fragments shaped like dinner plates, rush to the scene. They become sticky, forming a plug. Simultaneously, a complex series of protein reactions, called the coagulation cascade, activates, culminating in the conversion of a protein called fibrinogen into a mesh of fibrin. This mesh traps more platelets and red blood cells, creating a stable clot to seal the wound. It's a ballet of cellular and molecular cooperation, a finely tuned performance that saves our lives every time we get a cut. But the ticks in their quiet malevolence are not just watching this ballet. They are actively trying to sabotage it. Their saliva contains a potent cocktail of anticoagulants. These are not simple chemicals. They are precision-engineered proteins that interfere with different stages of the coagulation cascade. Some block the activation of platelets, while others directly inhibit enzymes like thrombin, which is crucial for converting fibrinogen into fibrin. They are like saboteurs in the wings, cutting the strings and confusing the dancers, ensuring that the ballet never reaches its grand finale. With 1 million ticks injecting these anticoagulants simultaneously, the entire system is thrown into disarray. The blood which should be clotting to seal the million tiny wounds is prevented from doing so. The river is not just flowing, it's now seeping from 1 million new unsealed streams. The sheer collective effect of this is a form of massive internal bleeding, not from a single catastrophic wound, but from 1 million microscopic ones. The blood pressure already plummeting from the widespread vasodilation now has no hope of recovering. This leads us to a curious and lesser-known fact about these tiny creatures. Some tick species, like the blackleg tick, are known to produce a protein called SALP15 in their saliva. SALP15 is a particularly clever piece of biological engineering. It binds to a specific protein on the surface of our dendritic cells, a type of immune cell that acts as a scout recognizing foreign invaders and presenting their antigens to other immune cells, like T cells, to mount a targeted attack. By binding to the dendritic cells, SALP15 effectively blindfolds them. It prevents the cells from maturation and in turn from performing their critical role as messengers. It's like a spy not just slipping past the guards, but actively convincing the chief of intelligence that there's nothing to report. This allows any pathogens the tick might be carrying to go undetected for a crucial period, giving them time to establish a foothold. In our thought experiment, this means that even if your immune system were not already overwhelmed by the sheer number of invaders, the message to fight would be severely muffled, if not silenced entirely. The silent symphony of the self we spoke of is not just playing a chaotic, overwhelming piece. Now the conductor is actively being misled. So, as the blood continues to seep and the immune system struggles to receive a clear message, the body begins a desperate process of compensation. The heart, the tireless drummer we will speak of later, must beat faster and faster to try and maintain some semblance of blood flow to the vital organs. The kidneys, the body's meticulous filters, attempt to conserve what precious fluid is left, but it is a losing battle. The brain, to the quiet library, is receiving less and less oxygen and nutrients, and the first signs of confusion and disorientation would begin to set in. The world would start to feel hazy, distant, like a dream that is slowly losing its focus. This raises a profoundly philosophical question. At what point does the body as a collection of systems cease to be you? If the chemical balance is entirely disrupted, if the brain is starved of oxygen, and if the immune system is blindfolded, does the consciousness, the I that perceives this suffering, still belong to the same being? The truth is, we don't really know for sure. The ancient Greeks pondered the ship of Theseus, but this is a far more intimate and terrifying paradox. A ship whose very planks are being quietly chemically dissolved. The chaos in the river of blood is not just a scientific event. It's a profound, personal tragedy. The blood, which is meant to carry the very essence of life, oxygen, nutrients, warmth, is now being actively thwarted. Its flow disrupted, its purpose subverted. The feeling would be one of growing coldness, not from the external world, but from within. A deep, bone-chilling cold that is the hallmark of circulatory collapse. It's the feeling of a fire slowly being extinguished from the inside. We are still at the very beginning of our journey, and yet we have already witnessed the breakdown of two of the body's most fundamental systems. We've seen the innate immune response overwhelmed and the hemostasis system systematically dismantled. In the next part, we will move from the river of blood to the fortress of the mind. We'll explore how this physical assault manifests in our consciousness, and how the brain, the theater of our thoughts and feelings, begins to interpret this surreal, feverish reality. The quiet hum of a million ticks on the skin will begin to have its own strange echo in the mind. The river of blood, now a chaotic tapestry of chemical warfare and broken communication, is slowly, inevitably flowing toward the mind's fortress. We've seen the systemic chaos unfolding. But what does this silent catastrophe feel like from the inside? What is the experience of the mind when the body is in full retreat? This is where our journey becomes less about biology and more about philosophy, less about the physical world and more about the strange, shifting landscape of consciousness. The core scientific concept we're exploring now is the neurochemical response to systemic shock. The brain, in its quiet library, is suddenly receiving a flood of distorted messages. The plummeting blood pressure means less oxygen is reaching its delicate tissues. The flood of inflammatory cytokines released by the overwhelmed immune system crosses the blood-brain barrier, acting as tiny saboteurs within the library's hallowed halls. These chemical signals aren't information. They're noise, a cacophony that drowns out the brain's normal symphony of neurotransmitters. The brain, which relies on a precise balance of chemicals like serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine to function, finds its internal climate thrown into disarray. The mind, which we experience as a cohesive single entity, is in reality a byproduct of a billion intricate electrochemical conversations. When those conversations are garbled and interrupted, the sense of self begins to fracture. The world might start to feel distant, unreal, as if you are watching a movie of your own life rather than living it. This brings us to a fascinating and deeply unsettling phenomenon: the Capgras delusion, a rare but documented neurological condition. In Capgras delusion, a person becomes convinced that a loved one, a spouse, a parent, a close friend has been replaced by an imposter. The person recognizes the face, but the emotional connection, the feeling of knowing, is absent. The brain's two parallel pathways for facial recognition, one for identity and one for emotional familiarity, have become disconnected. The rational part of the brain says, "That's my husband," but the emotional part says, "No, it doesn't feel like him." In our scenario, the brain, under severe stress from oxygen deprivation and chemical noise, could begin to experience a global form of this delusion. Not just people, but the very world itself could feel like an imposter. The bed you are lying in, the room around you, the very sensation of your body. It all might seem familiar, but strangely, terrifyingly, not real. The body under attack by a million tiny creatures becomes a foreign object, a shell you are trapped inside. The mind's fortress isn't being breached by an enemy it can see. It's being quietly dissolved from within its foundation of reality, slowly turning to sand. The sensory experience of a million ticks would be profound, but perhaps not in the way we first imagine. It wouldn't be a sharp, singular pain. It would be a new kind of sensation, a vast, humming, crawling itch that covers every inch of your being. It's a feeling that has no name in our language because it has no parallel in our experience. The brain, in its desperation to make sense of this, might begin to invent its own reality. You might start to hear phantom sounds, see shimmering lights at the edges of your vision, or feel phantom sensations of falling or floating. These are not just hallucinations. They are the brain's desperate last-ditch attempt to create a coherent narrative from a stream of incoherent data. It is a storyteller, but a failing one trying to weave a story with torn and jumbled pages. This raises a deep philosophical question. What is the relationship between our physical body and our mental state? We often think of the mind as a separate entity, a ghost in the machine. But in this scenario, the dependence of the mind on the body is brutally clear. When the body's systems break down, the mind's ability to perceive, to reason, to feel fractures along with them. The brain is not just a stage for consciousness, it is the very instrument that plays the music of our thoughts. When the instrument is damaged, the music becomes discordant. So is consciousness a fundamental property of the universe? Or is it a fragile temporary arrangement of matter and energy that can be undone by a million tiny parasites? The truth is, we don't really know for sure. It's a profound mystery that science has only begun to scratch the surface of, and our morbid thought experiment puts it into sharp, terrifying focus. The initial shock and chaos of the tick invasion have now moved past the skin and the bloodstream and have reached the very core of your being. The mind's fortress is no longer a place of quiet contemplation. It is a library filled with screaming alarms where the books have been scattered and the librarians are wandering in a daze. The world is becoming a waking dream, a feverish, distorted landscape where the only certainty is the all-encompassing sensation of the quiet, crawling invasion. In the next section, we will explore this feverish world in more detail as the body's core temperature begins to rise and the internal landscape is painted in vivid, distorted colors. The reality we know will begin to unravel completely. The mind's fortress, now a fractured and bewildering place, begins to heat up. This rising heat is not just a sensation. It's a profound biological event, a fever. A fever is not a malfunction, but a deliberate, organized act of the body's central command. It is a core scientific concept that is often misunderstood. We tend to see fever as a symptom of illness, a sign that something is wrong. But a fever is actually a powerful tool of the immune system, a scorched earth policy designed to make the body a less hospitable place for pathogens. When the immune system detects a widespread invasion, it releases a class of molecules called pyrogens. These pyrogens travel to the brain and act on a part of the hypothalamus, the body's thermoregulatory center. They essentially reset the body's thermostat to a higher temperature. This isn't a slow, gentle warming. It's a deliberate, systemic change. It's the body saying, if you want to live here, you'll have to adapt to a hotter climate. The higher temperature directly inhibits the replication of many bacteria and viruses, and it also speeds up the metabolic rate of our own immune cells, making them more effective. So as the million ticks inject their infectious passengers and their chemical cocktails, the body's central heating system is switched on. But this deliberate act has profound consequences for the mind. As the body's temperature rises, the brain's delicate chemistry is thrown further out of balance. Neurons, which are exquisitely sensitive to temperature, begin to fire erratically. The world starts to shimmer and waver. The once clear lines of reality become soft and porous. This isn't just a physical sensation. It's a fundamental shift in perception. The quiet, calm library of the mind is now bathed in the distorted, surreal glow of a fever dream. The world is rendered in vivid, almost hallucinatory colors. The hum of a million tiny legs crawling on your skin might transform into the sound of a distant swarm of bees, or the whisper of 1,000 voices saying your name. The feeling of being cold, despite the raging heat, is a classic symptom of this. The body's thermostat has been reset, and it perceives its normal temperature as too low, triggering the shivers and the sensation of chill even as it burns. This brings us to a fascinating and little-known scientific fact about dreams and consciousness. During REM sleep, our bodies are paralyzed by a specific neurotransmitter glycine, which inhibits motor neurons. This is a survival mechanism, preventing us from acting out our dreams. But sometimes this paralysis can persist for a few moments after waking, a terrifying state known as sleep paralysis. In this state, a person is fully conscious, but completely unable to move. It is often accompanied by vivid and sometimes terrifying hallucinations. In our scenario, the line between waking and dreaming is becoming increasingly blurred. The chemical chaos in your brain, fueled by the fever and the constant sensory overload, might induce a state similar to a prolonged waking sleep paralysis. You might be fully aware of the horror unfolding on your skin, but completely unable to move. Your consciousness, which is the sum of your sensory input and your inner monologue, becomes a prisoner in a body. It can no longer control, trapped in a reality that is becoming increasingly indistinguishable from a nightmare. This raises a deeply philosophical question. What is the true nature of reality when our sensory organs and our cognitive faculties are compromised? We rely on our eyes, our ears, our sense of touch, and the rational processing of our brain to tell us what is real and what is not. But what happens when those sources of information are all lying to us? Is the reality of the fever dream just as valid as the reality of the waking world? The truth is, we don't really know for sure. It's a question that has haunted philosophers for centuries. And in this thought experiment, it becomes a deeply personal, terrifying, and immediate problem. The world is becoming a funhouse mirror, and you are the only one left to look into it. The journey continues, but now it is less of a linear path and more of a spiral into a strange, feverish world. We've moved from the initial physical assault to the chemical warfare of the bloodstream, and now we are deep within the mind's surreal landscape. The body, in a desperate attempt to protect itself, is creating a world of its own, a world of heat and hallucination, a world where the distinction between what is real and what is imagined has been completely erased. In the next part of our story, we will explore the hidden kingdom that the ticks are carrying with them, the world of microbes and pathogens, and the new war that is just beginning to be waged deep within the body systems. The feverish world of the mind is now a stage for a new silent drama. We've journeyed through the immediate assault, the chemical sabotage, and the mental fragmentation. But the ticks, those million tiny travelers, have not arrived alone. They carry with them a hidden kingdom, an unseen world of microbes and pathogens. This is where the story shifts from an external siege to an internal war, a quiet battle for territory and survival waged on a microscopic scale. The core scientific concept here is the intricate relationship between a vector, the tick, and the pathogen it transmits. A vector is simply an organism that transmits a disease from one host to another. Ticks are master vectors. They are tiny ancient ships, and the pathogens they carry are their passengers. The diseases they transmit are as varied and complex as life itself, from Lyme disease caused by the bacterium Borrelia burgdorferi to ehrlichiosis, anaplasmosis, and a host of others. The pathogens have evolved a brilliant, if sinister, strategy. They do not want to kill the tick, which is their vehicle. They want to live in harmony with it, to use its unique biology to find a new host and a new meal. They wait patiently in the tick's gut, and when the tick begins to feed, they travel up the salivary glands and are injected directly into the bloodstream of the host. With 1 million ticks, the amount of pathogens being injected would be staggering. It wouldn't be a single infection. It would be a simultaneous siege by a multitude of different bacterial and viral species. Your body, already struggling with distributive shock and a compromised immune system, would suddenly have to fight a war on a new invisible front. This is where the sheer scale of our thought experiment becomes truly surreal. It's not a single army storming the gates. It's 1,000 different armies all arriving at the same time, all with different tactics and different weapons. The fever, the body's scorched earth policy, is now fighting an enemy it cannot possibly identify in its entirety. This brings us to a strange and little-known scientific fact about co-infections. It's a bit of a biological paradox. When a single tick bites you, it can transmit more than one pathogen. For example, a black-legged tick famous for carrying the bacterium that causes Lyme disease can also carry the protozoan that causes babesiosis and the bacteria that causes anaplasmosis. When a person is infected with more than one of these pathogens at the same time, it's called a co-infection. The symptoms are often more severe, more varied, and more difficult to diagnose than a single infection. In our scenario with 1 million ticks, the concept of co-infection is magnified 1 millionfold. Your body would not just be fighting Lyme disease. It would be fighting a biological mosaic of every disease every tick has ever carried. The effect on your system would be an unprecedented biological event, a medical mystery with no possible solution. The body, an ancient and complex ecosystem, is suddenly populated by a host of new aggressive and hostile species. A war for territory is not just beginning. It's already lost before it has truly started. This raises a profound and perhaps unanswerable philosophical question. What is the true definition of a single organism? If your body is teeming with 1,000,000 tiny arachnids, a host of different bacteria, viruses, and parasites, all of them fighting, all of them consuming, all of them altering your biology, can we still say that you are a single autonomous being? Or have you become something else entirely, a walking, breathing ecosystem, a complex and beautiful biological experiment in the art of living? The truth is, we don't really know for sure. The line between a single organism and a collective one is in this scenario completely blurred. So, as we drift deeper into this strange, feverish world, the initial external horror of the ticks on the skin has given way to a more intimate, internal terror. The silent siege has moved into the blood, into the brain, and now into the very cells themselves. The body, this ancient kingdom, is now under assault from within. The heart, the tireless drummer we will soon explore, is beating faster and faster, a desperate attempt to keep the kingdom alive even as it is consumed by 1,000 different invaders. The lungs are whispering a strange new song. In the next section, we will turn our attention to the cardiovascular system, focusing on the heart's brave but futile struggle to maintain rhythm against an overwhelming tide of pressure and strain. The hidden kingdom of microbes is now flourishing, a silent war being waged on a cellular level. But as that war rages, the entire body is slowly but surely being drained of its most precious resource. This brings us to a quiet, devastating concept, the curious case of the missing blood. We've spoken of the bloodstream as a river, but now it is becoming a network of 1,000,000 tiny, uncontrolled tributaries, all leaking life force into the surrounding tissues. The core scientific concept we are exploring here is hypovolemia, a medical term for a dangerously low volume of blood plasma. It's a cascade effect, a domino fall of biological systems. Each of the 1,000,000 ticks in their silent parasitic efficiency are drawing in a small amount of blood, but the sheer number of them turns this trickle into a torrent. A single tick can engorge itself to several times its normal size. While the individual loss is minimal, the cumulative effect is profound. Imagine 1,000,000 tiny straws all drinking from the same glass. The glass empties astonishingly quickly. The blood is not just a fluid. It's the very life force of the body, a vital thread in a grand tapestry. As it is lost, the tapestry begins to unravel. This loss of blood is compounded by the tick's salivary anticoagulants, which we discussed earlier. The wounds, which should be sealing themselves with clots, are instead continuing to ooze blood into the interstitial spaces, the areas between cells. The body's fluid balance is a delicate equilibrium, and it is being shattered. The total blood volume, the very pressure that keeps the river flowing, is dropping precipitously. This leads to a state of hypovolemic shock, a condition where the heart can no longer pump enough blood to the vital organs. The cells, starved of oxygen and nutrients, begin to cry out for help in a language of chemical signals, a silent plea that the body in its overwhelmed state can no longer answer. The journey from life to death is not always a violent event. It can be a slow, quiet, and peaceful fading away, a gentle brushing past of life's final moments. This brings us to a strange and little-known scientific fact. Some species of ticks, like the paralysis tick, secrete a neurotoxin in their saliva that can cause tick paralysis. This is a bizarre and terrifying condition where a single tick's bite can lead to a progressive ascending paralysis that can eventually lead to respiratory failure. The toxin, a protein that acts on the nervous system, inhibits the release of a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which is crucial for muscle contractions. The brain sends the command, move, but the muscles simply do not receive the message. In our scenario with 1,000,000 ticks, the amount of neurotoxin injected would be immense. The paralysis would not be slow and progressive. It would be immediate and complete. The paralysis would not just be physical, it would be sensory as well. The very nerves that carry the signals of pain, touch, and temperature would be silenced. The hum of 1,000,000 ticks would fade into a numb, silent void. The body would be a silent, unmoving statue, a mausoleum of a living being. This raises a deeply philosophical question. If you can no longer feel your body, are you still in it? If the sensory input that defines your physical existence is completely gone, does your consciousness, your sense of self, become a disembodied observer, watching the final silent moments of its former home? The truth is, we don't really know for sure. It's a question that has haunted mystics and philosophers for millennia, and in this thought experiment, it becomes a deeply personal, terrifying, and immediate problem. The mind's fortress, already a fractured place, is now a silent prison, a solitary observer of a fading reality. The world is becoming a funhouse mirror, and you are the only one left to look into it. The journey continues, but it is now less of a linear path and more of a spiral into a strange, silent world. We've moved from the initial physical assault to the chemical warfare of the bloodstream, and now we are deep within the mind's surreal landscape. The body, in a desperate attempt to protect itself, is creating a world of its own, a world of heat and hallucination, a world where the distinction between what is real and what is imagined has been completely erased. In the next part of our story, we will explore the heart's tireless trembling drum, a desperate struggle to keep the kingdom alive, even as it is consumed by 1,000 different invaders. The silent statue of a body is a testament to the quiet efficiency of the neurotoxin. But even as the muscles lie still and the senses are muted, one thing remains in motion: the heart. It is the tireless trembling drum of our existence, the engine that powers every other system. We have seen the chaos in the bloodstream, the collapsing pressure, and the missing volume. Now, we must turn our attention to the one organ that is fighting a losing battle against these forces. The core scientific concept at play here is the body's cardiovascular compensation to shock. The heart's primary function is to pump oxygenated blood to all the tissues and organs. It's a beautifully simple, powerful machine. But when the blood volume plummets, as it has in our scenario, the heart's job becomes exponentially harder. The cardiovascular system is a closed loop, and the pressure within that loop is what keeps everything flowing. When the pressure drops, the heart, like a pump in a half-empty well, has to work much harder to move the same amount of fluid. The brain, sensing this, sends out a distress signal. It releases hormones like adrenaline and norepinephrine, which tell the heart to beat faster and harder. This is a crucial life-saving mechanism in a normal emergency, like a cut or a minor injury. But in this scenario, the heart's valiant effort is ultimately futile. The heart rate or pulse would soar to dangerous levels, a condition known as tachycardia. But this isn't a sign of strength. It's a sign of a system in profound distress. The heart is beating faster and faster, but it's pumping less and less blood with each beat. The muscle itself, starved of oxygen and nutrients, begins to tire. It's like a drummer trying to keep rhythm against a rising tide of pressure and strain, a drummer who is getting more and more exhausted with every frantic beat. The electrical signals that govern the heart's rhythm, which are exquisitely sensitive to the body's chemical balance, would also begin to go haywire. The heart might start to beat irregularly, a condition known as arrhythmia, its rhythm becoming a frantic, disorganized tattoo. This leads us to a strange and little-known scientific fact. Some species of ticks, when they feed for a prolonged period, can secrete a toxin that leads to a condition called tick-induced cardiomyopathy. This is a direct assault on the heart muscle itself, causing inflammation and weakening. The heart, already working in a state of extreme stress, is now being poisoned. The muscle fibers begin to swell, and lose their ability to contract effectively. The heart, the tireless drummer, is not just exhausted. Its drum is beginning to fall apart. The very beat that is trying to save the body is itself being silenced. The sound of the drum, once a steady, reassuring rhythm, is becoming a weak, trembling echo that will soon fade to nothing. This raises a deep philosophical question. What is the true nature of courage? Is it a conscious choice, a deliberate act of will? Or is it a purely biological response, a desperate pre-programmed attempt by a muscle to save the organism it serves? The heart, in its frantic, futile struggle, is not making a conscious choice to be brave. It is simply a machine following the instructions it has been given. But to us listening to its trembling, dying beat, it feels like an act of profound heroism. The truth is, we don't really know for sure. The line between a biological imperative and a philosophical concept is in this scenario completely blurred. The journey continues, but the world is becoming quieter, colder. The tireless drum of the heart is beginning to falter its rhythm, becoming a weak, trembling echo that will soon fade to nothing. The mind's fortress, a silent prison, is observing the final desperate moments of its former home. The chaos in the bloodstream, the chemical warfare, the silent paralysis, all of these forces are now converging on the very engine of life. In the next part of our story, we will turn our attention to the lungs, the delicate sails of our existence, and the strange final song they begin to whisper as the body systems shut down. The heart's tireless trembling drum is now faltering its rhythm, becoming a weak, disorganized tattoo. But as the heart struggles, the lungs, the delicate sails of our existence, are about to be caught in a strange new storm. We've seen the chaotic river of blood and the mind's fractured fortress. Now we must turn our attention to the respiratory system, a process so fundamental to life that we often forget its elegance until it is threatened. The core scientific concept at play here is systemic inflammatory response syndrome, or SIRS. It's a cascade effect, a domino fall of biological systems. The massive, widespread invasion by 1 million ticks, coupled with the release of their chemical cocktails and the onslaught of their pathogens, triggers an immune response so profound and so widespread that it begins to harm the body itself. The immune system, in its desperate attempt to fight the enemy, becomes a fire that burns down the house. The body releases a flood of inflammatory cytokines, which are signaling molecules that tell other cells to join the fight. This is a crucial life-saving mechanism in a normal localized infection. But in this scenario, the signals are sent out to every part of the body, causing a massive systemic inflammation. This inflammation directly affects the lungs. The tiny air sacs in our lungs, called alveoli, are where the magic of gas exchange happens. Oxygen from the air we breathe diffuses into the bloodstream, and carbon dioxide from the blood diffuses out. It's a beautifully simple, elegant process. But in SIRS, the inflammation causes the delicate walls of the alveoli to become leaky, filling them with fluid and inflammatory cells. This is a condition known as acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS. The lungs, which should be light and full of air, become heavy and waterlogged. It's like the delicate sails of a ship trying to catch the wind in a sudden violent storm, only to find themselves becoming heavy with water and unable to catch any breeze at all. The body, starved of oxygen, begins to gasp for air, but the lungs simply cannot perform their function. The silent, peaceful rhythm of breathing becomes a frantic, painful struggle. This leads us to a strange and little-known scientific fact about how a small number of pathogens can trigger a massive response. In the case of some tick-borne pathogens, such as the bacterium that causes Q fever, the bacteria can trigger a severe inflammatory response in the lungs, even if the number of bacteria is relatively low. This is a bizarre and terrifying condition where a tiny invader can trigger a massive, disproportionate response. The body, in its desperation to fight the enemy, is essentially killing itself. The lungs, which are the very engines of life, are becoming a battlefield where the body's own soldiers are causing more damage than the enemy. The silent, gentle rhythm of breathing becomes a frantic, painful struggle, a strange final song that will soon fade to nothing. This raises a deep philosophical question. What is the true nature of self-preservation? Is it a conscious choice, a deliberate act of will? Or is it a purely biological response, a desperate pre-programmed attempt by the body's systems to save the organism it serves? The immune system, in its frantic futile struggle, is not making a conscious choice to be brave. It is simply a machine following the instructions it has been given. But to us, listening to its trembling dying beat, it feels like an act of profound heroism. The truth is, we don't really know for sure. The line between a biological imperative and a philosophical concept is in this scenario completely blurred. The journey continues, but the world is becoming quieter, colder. The tireless drum of the heart is beginning to falter, and the lungs are whispering a strange final song that will soon fade to nothing. The mind's fortress, a silent prison, is observing the final desperate moments of its former home. The chaos in the bloodstream, the chemical warfare, the silent paralysis, all of these forces are now converging on the very engines of life. In the next part of our story, we will delve into the cellular secrets of the long decay where individual cells become silent, fading stars in a collapsing constellation. The lungs, those delicate sails, are now heavy with water, and the heart, that tireless drummer, is now faltering. We have seen the systemic collapse from the grand macroscopic view. But what is happening at the very foundation of your being, at the level of the individual cell? This is where our story becomes a quiet, intimate tragedy, a slow, methodical dissolution. The core scientific concept we're exploring here is cellular necrosis, or cell death. Normally, cells have a graceful, pre-programmed way of dying, a process called apoptosis. It's an organized cleanup process where a cell commits a kind of biological suicide, shrinking and breaking into tiny packages that are easily consumed by other cells. It's a crucial part of our development and health, a way of maintaining order and preventing cancer. But in our scenario, with the body in a state of systemic shock and oxygen deprivation, cells are not dying gracefully. They are dying chaotically, violently. This is necrosis. Necrosis is a messy, uncontrolled death. The cell, starved of oxygen and nutrients, can no longer maintain its internal integrity. Its membrane, a delicate border between the internal world of the cell and the external world of the body, begins to fail. The cell swells its internal contents, spilling out into the surrounding tissue. This release of cellular guts triggers a new wave of inflammation, a vicious cycle that further compounds the damage. The individual cells, which once worked in perfect harmony, now become silent, fading stars in a collapsing constellation. The intricate machinery of life, the mitochondria that power the cell, the nucleus that holds the blueprint of your existence, all of it begins to fall apart. This brings us to a bizarre and little-known scientific fact about the life and death of a human hair follicle. Hair follicles. The tiny organs in your skin that produce hair are one of the most metabolically active tissues in the body. They have a brilliant and complex life cycle, growing and resting and shedding. But they are also exquisitely sensitive to stress. A major illness, a high fever, or a profound trauma can cause them to shut down their production of hair in a condition known as telogen effluvium. All of the follicles go into a resting phase at once, and a few months later, the hair begins to fall out in massive handfuls. In our scenario, the systemic shock and fever would be so profound that the hair follicles would not just go into telogen effluvium, they would likely die. The very essence of your physical being, the hair on your head and body, would begin to fade, not from a simple illness, but from a total systemic collapse. The once vibrant constellation of your body is beginning to lose its stars. This raises a deep philosophical question. What is the relationship between our physical being and our sense of self? We often think of our physical body as the vessel for our consciousness, the home we inhabit. But what happens when that home begins to crumble? When its very foundation, the individual cells, starts to fall apart? Does our consciousness, our sense of I, shrink with it? Or does it remain a quiet, disembodied observer, watching the long, slow decay of its former home? The truth is, we don't really know for sure. The line between a biological imperative and a philosophical concept is in this scenario completely blurred. The journey continues, but the world is becoming quieter, colder. The tireless drum of the heart is beginning to falter, and the lungs are whispering a strange final song that will soon fade to nothing. The mind's fortress, a silent prison, is observing the final desperate moments of its former home. The chaos in the bloodstream, the chemical warfare, the silent paralysis, all of these forces are now converging on the very engines of life. In the next part of our story, we will explore the paradox of infinite replication, the surprising and bizarre potential for a single tick to transmit multiple diseases, and what this tells us about the nature of life itself. The individual cells are now dying chaotically, their delicate borders failing, their contents spilling into the void. This silent, long decay is the final act of 1,000 small tragedies. We've explored the macroscopic effects of the tick's invasion, but now we must consider a new layer of complexity, a sinister efficiency that makes this scenario even more profound. This is the paradox of infinite replication, the surprising and bizarre potential for a single tick to transmit a multitude of diseases. The core scientific concept at play here is the pathogen life cycle, and how a vector, the tick, can serve as a biological bridge for a dizzying array of infectious agents. A tick is not just a needle. It's a living syringe that can carry and transmit a variety of different diseases. For example, a single black-legged tick can be infected with the bacterium that causes Lyme disease, the protozoan that causes babesiosis, and the bacteria that causes anaplasmosis. Each pathogen has its own life cycle, its own intricate dance with the host and the tick. The Lyme bacterium, Borrelia burgdorferi, for example, is a master of disguise, changing its surface proteins to evade the immune system. The babesiosis protozoan, Babesia microtii, is a tiny parasite that invades and destroys red blood cells, causing a malaria-like illness. Each of these is a full-fledged disease, a complex biological event in its own right. With 1 million ticks, the amount of each pathogen being injected would be staggering. But the more terrifying prospect is the sheer variety. The body would not just be fighting one enemy, it would be fighting 1,000 different enemies, all with different tactics and different weapons. This leads us to a strange and little-known scientific fact about the tick's saliva and its role in pathogen transmission. A tick's saliva is not just a tool for feeding. It's a biological command center that actively facilitates the transmission of pathogens. The saliva contains a variety of proteins that can suppress the host's immune response, allowing the pathogens to establish a foothold before the body can react. It's a bit of a biological paradox. The tick's saliva, which is designed to help the tick feed, also helps the pathogens it carries to succeed. It's a symbiotic relationship, a kind of unholy alliance. The pathogens are not just passengers, they are active participants in the tick's feeding process. For example, the Lyme bacterium, Borrelia burgdorferi, is known to upregulate the production of certain proteins in the tick's salivary glands, making the transmission more efficient. In our scenario with 1 million ticks, the amount of these biological command centers would be immense, making the establishment of 1 million different infections a near certainty. It's a process akin to a single spark igniting an entire forest. This raises a profound philosophical question. What is the true nature of life and death, and how does it relate to the concept of a single organism? If your body is teeming with 1 million tiny arachnids, a host of different bacteria, viruses, and parasites, all of them fighting, all of them consuming, all of them altering your biology, can we still say that you are a single autonomous being? Or have you become something else entirely? a walking, breathing ecosystem, a complex and beautiful biological experiment in the art of living. The truth is we don't really know for sure. The line between a single organism and a collective one is in this scenario completely blurred. The journey continues, but the world is becoming quieter, colder. The tireless drum of the heart is beginning to falter, and the lungs are whispering a strange final song that will soon fade to nothing. The mind's fortress, a silent prison, is observing the final desperate moments of its former home. The chaos in the bloodstream, the chemical warfare, the silent paralysis, all of these forces are now converging on the very engines of life. In the next part of our story, we will turn our attention to the great unknown, contemplating the thin line between life and death and what consciousness might experience as the body shuts down, seeing it as a final quiet dialogue. The silent, long decay is a quiet tragedy unfolding at the cellular level. We've journeyed through the macroscopic and microscopic, the external and the internal. Now, as the body systems begin their final choreographed shutdown, we must contemplate the most profound mystery of all, the thin line between life and death. What happens to consciousness, to the I, that is experiencing all of this when the body can no longer sustain it? This is a conversation with the great unknown, a final, quiet dialogue. The core scientific concept we're grappling with here is the nature of consciousness itself. What is it? We know it's a product of the brain, a complex symphony of electrochemical signals, but we don't know why it emerges or where it resides. Is it a unified field? An emergent property of a million neurons firing in concert? Or is it a more fundamental, almost quantum-level phenomenon? As the brain is starved of oxygen and nutrients, as the chemical chaos becomes all-encompassing, consciousness doesn't just switch off like a light bulb. It fades, fractures, and distorts. The final moments are likely not of a sudden searing pain, but of a quiet, peaceful, and profoundly confusing dissolution. The world, already a fever dream, would become something else entirely, a lucid dream without a dreamer, a theater without an audience. The mind to the quiet library is no longer a place of chaos. It's a place of silence, of fading echoes. This leads us to a strange and little-known scientific fact about the near-death experience. People who have been revived after their hearts have stopped often report a variety of similar experiences: a sense of floating above their body, a feeling of peace and detachment, a journey through a tunnel of light, a review of their life. While these experiences are often interpreted as spiritual or supernatural, science offers a more grounded, if no less mysterious, explanation. It's possible that these are a product of the brain's final desperate moments. As the brain shuts down, it releases a flood of neurochemicals. For example, some researchers believe that the brain's final moments are accompanied by a massive release of a neurotransmitter called dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, a powerful hallucinogen that is found naturally in the brain. This could explain the vivid out-of-body experiences and the sense of peace and detachment. It's the brain in its final moments, creating one last beautiful and profoundly comforting story for itself. In our scenario with the body in a state of extreme stress and chemical chaos, this process would be magnified a millionfold. The journey into death would not be a single solitary path, but a kaleidoscope of 1,000 different dreams, 1,000 different endings, all happening at once. This raises a profound philosophical question. What is the true nature of the self? If consciousness can be altered, fractured, and even recreated by a flood of chemicals, does the self still exist? Is the I that is experiencing all of this a real, tangible thing? Or is it a beautiful, fleeting illusion created by a fragile, temporary arrangement of matter and energy? The truth is, we don't really know for sure. It's a question that has haunted mystics and philosophers for millennia. And in this thought experiment, it becomes a deeply personal, terrifying, and immediate problem. The world is becoming a funhouse mirror, and you are the only one left to look into it. The journey continues, but the world is becoming quieter, colder. The tireless drum of the heart is beginning to falter, and the lungs are whispering a strange final song that will soon fade to nothing. The mind's fortress, a silent prison, is observing the final desperate moments of its former home. The chaos in the bloodstream, the chemical warfare, the silent paralysis, all of these forces are now converging on the very engines of life. In the next part of our story, we will step back and consider the long-term post-survival effects, such as post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome, framing it as a haunting melody that lingers long after the music has stopped. The conversation with the great unknown has concluded, and now we must for a moment step out of the body and look back from a distance. The mind's final story has been told. But what if, in a grand, improbable twist of fate, you survived? What would life be like for the organism that endured this profound biological catastrophe? This is not a happy ending. It's a reckoning. It's a haunting melody that lingers long after the music has stopped. The core scientific concept we're exploring here is the long-term biological and psychological effects of post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome, or PTLDS. A person who is bitten by a single tick carrying Borrelia burgdorferi, the bacterium that causes Lyme disease, can be treated with antibiotics and make a full recovery. But for a significant minority of people, a different fate awaits. Even after the bacterium is gone, they can experience a constellation of debilitating symptoms for months or even years. These symptoms can include chronic fatigue, widespread muscle and joint pain, cognitive dysfunction, and a general feeling of being unwell. The cause of this syndrome is not fully understood, but one leading theory is that the initial infection triggers an autoimmune response, where the body's own immune system, in its desperation to fight the enemy, begins to attack its own tissues. It's a fire that continues to burn long after the spark has been extinguished. In our scenario with 1 million ticks and 1 million different pathogens, the concept of PTLDS is magnified 1,000,000-fold. The body, in its heroic but futile battle, would have gone through a profound and systemic change. The immune system, a complex and beautifully balanced orchestra, would have learned to play a new chaotic and self-destructive song. The nervous system, a finely tuned communication network, would have been permanently rewired. The heart, the lungs, the kidneys, all of the vital organs would have been subjected to an unimaginable amount of stress. Even if by some miracle they survived, they would be forever changed. The person who endured this ordeal would not be the same person who began it. The experience would leave a permanent scar, a ghost in the machine. It's a haunting melody that lingers long after the music has stopped. This brings us to a strange and little-known scientific fact about epigenetics: the study of how our environment can change the way our genes are expressed. It's not a change to the DNA itself, but a change to the way our body reads the DNA. Environmental factors like stress, trauma, and disease can cause chemical modifications to our DNA, turning certain genes on or off. These changes can be passed down to future generations. In our scenario, the profound trauma of the tick invasion would have caused a cascade of epigenetic changes. The body would have learned to live in a state of high alert, a constant state of inflammation and stress. These changes, these cellular memories, would be a permanent part of the organism that survived. They would be a living echo of a different life, a life before the swarm. This raises a deep philosophical question. What is the true nature of trauma? Is it just a memory? A psychological wound that can be healed with time? Or is it something more, a physical, biological change that is written into our very cells? A permanent modification that affects not just us, but our children and our children's children. The truth is, we don't really know for sure. It's a question that has haunted philosophers and scientists for millennia. And in this thought experiment, it becomes a deeply personal, terrifying, and immediate problem. The world is becoming a funhouse mirror, and you are the only one left to look into it. The journey continues, but the world is becoming quieter, colder. The tireless drum of the heart is beginning to falter, and the lungs are whispering a strange final song that will soon fade to nothing. The mind's fortress, a silent prison, is observing the final desperate moments of its former home. The chaos in the bloodstream, the chemical warfare, the silent paralysis, all of these forces are now converging on the very engines of life. In the next part of our story, we will turn our attention to the slow return of the quiet, the body's incredible capacity for healing and regeneration. But with a note of caution, seeing the recovery process as the slow, careful work of rebuilding a fractured cathedral. The haunting melody of a different life has begun to fade, but its echoes linger. The body, having survived the impossible, now embarks on its most arduous journey, yet the slow return of the quiet. We've explored the systemic collapse, the final frantic moments of life. Now we must consider the long, painstaking, and often incomplete process of healing. It's a process that is less a triumphant return to form and more the careful, slow work of rebuilding a fractured cathedral. The core scientific concept we're exploring here is tissue regeneration and the concept of a homeostatic set point. Our bodies are in a constant state of flux, building and breaking down cells in a process that is so finely tuned we are often unaware of it. After a massive systemic trauma, this delicate balance, or homeostatic set point, is completely thrown out of whack. The body, having survived the brink of death, is now in a state of high alert. The immune system is still overactive. The nervous system is still on fire, and the organs are still trying to compensate for a crisis that is on a macroscopic level over. The recovery process is not just about replacing damaged cells. It's about retraining every system, every cell, to return to its original peaceful state. It's like trying to get a symphony orchestra to play a gentle, quiet piece after they have just finished a frantic, chaotic one. The muscles are still tense, the strings are still vibrating, and the conductor is still in a state of panic. This leads us to a strange and little-known scientific fact about the memory of the immune system. Our adaptive immune system, the one that learns to fight specific pathogens, has a remarkable memory. It creates memory T cells and B cells that can live for decades, ready to spring into action if they ever encounter the same pathogen again. This is the basis of how vaccines work, but in our scenario, the immune system would have been exposed to a dizzying array of pathogens and chemical cocktails. It would have developed a memory that is not just of a single enemy, but of 1,000 different ones. This memory would be a ghost in the machine, a constant low-grade inflammation that would continue to plague the body long after the pathogens are gone. It's a permanent state of high alert, a soldier who can no longer put down his gun. This raises a deep philosophical question. What does it mean to heal? Is it simply the absence of disease, the cessation of symptoms? Or is it a return to a state of wholeness, a feeling of being at peace in your own body? If the body has been so fundamentally altered by a catastrophic event, can it ever truly be healed? Or is it destined to live with the echoes of that event forever? A fractured cathedral that has been carefully and painstakingly rebuilt, but is no longer the same. The truth is, we don't really know for sure. It's a question that has haunted philosophers and mystics for millennia, and in this thought experiment, it becomes a deeply personal, terrifying, and immediate problem. The world is becoming a funhouse mirror, and you are the only one left to look into it. The journey continues, but the world is becoming quieter, colder. The tireless drum of the heart is beginning to falter, and the lungs are whispering a strange, final song that will soon fade to nothing. The mind's fortress, a silent prison, is observing the final desperate moments of its former home. The chaos in the bloodstream, the chemical warfare, the silent paralysis, all of these forces are now converging on the very engines of life. In the next part of our story, we will turn our attention to the tick as a tiny mirror reflecting on the symbolic nature of the parasite and its relationship to humanity, asking what this tiny creature tells us about our own fragility and interconnectedness. The slow rebuilding of the fractured cathedral is a testament to the body's incredible resilience, but also to its lasting scars. The haunting melody of a different life has become a part of the song of the survivor. Now, in our final moments of this journey, we must step back and see the tick not just as a parasite, but as a mirror. We will reflect on the symbolic nature of this tiny creature and its relationship to humanity, asking what this tiny parasite tells us about our own fragility and interconnectedness. The core scientific concept we're exploring here is the symbiotic relationship between a parasite and its host. A parasite is an organism that lives on or in another organism, its host, and benefits by deriving nutrients at the host's expense. We often think of this relationship as a simple one-sided affair, with the parasite as the villain and the host as the victim. But in reality, it's far more complex. The parasite has evolved over millennia to live in a delicate balance with its host. It doesn't want to kill the host too quickly, as that would be the end of its food source. It's a relationship of subtle manipulation, of quiet coexistence. The tick, in its quiet efficiency, is a master of this. Its saliva, a masterpiece of chemical warfare, is designed not to cause a violent reaction, but to go unnoticed. It's a silent, almost invisible partnership. This brings us to a strange and little-known scientific fact about the co-evolution of parasites and hosts. Over millions of years, parasites and hosts have engaged in a kind of biological arms race. The host develops new defenses, and the parasite develops new ways to circumvent those defenses. It's a never-ending dance, a slow, quiet, and profound conversation between two different forms of life. Some of these co-evolutionary relationships are so ancient that they are an integral part of the host's biology. For example, some scientists believe that viruses, which are a form of parasite, have played a crucial role in the evolution of our own DNA, with viral genes becoming a part of our own genome. The tick, in its quiet existence, is a testament to this profound and ancient dance. It is a mirror reflecting a part of our own history that we often choose to ignore. This raises a deep philosophical question. What is the true nature of humanity's place in the natural world? We often see ourselves as separate from nature, as observers or masters of it. But the tick, in its quiet efficiency, reminds us of our own fragility, of our place in a complex web of life and death. It reminds us that we are not the masters of our own domain, that we are in fact hosts to a dizzying array of life forms, both inside and outside our bodies. The tick is not an enemy. It is a mirror, a tiny creature that reflects a profound truth about our own existence. We are not separate from the natural world. We are a part of it, a temporary arrangement of matter and energy that is constantly being shaped and reshaped by forces we can barely comprehend. The journey has reached its end. We have traveled from the first almost imperceptible contact of 1 million ticks to the final profound questions about our place in the universe. We have seen the body as a vast, living continent, a chaotic river, a quiet library, a fractured cathedral. And we have seen the tick as a tiny mirror reflecting a profound truth about our own fragility and interconnectedness. In our final moment, we will bring our awareness back to the present, to the quiet space you are in, and we will say a final, gentle goodbye. The fractured cathedral is now rebuilt, and the haunting melody has faded into a quiet hum. We've looked at the tick as a mirror, but now in our final moments, we must simply see it for what it is, a tiny ancient life form that has, in a cosmic twist of fate, allowed us to ask profound questions about ourselves. The journey is at an end, and all that is left is to quietly contemplate the meaning of what we have explored. The core scientific concept we're exploring here is our place in the grand narrative of evolution and biology. We often think of evolution as a slow linear march toward perfection with humanity at the pinnacle. But the tick, that ancient silent traveler, reminds us that evolution is a chaotic, messy, and profoundly interconnected process. It's not a ladder. It's a web. We are not at the top of that web. We are in the middle of it, a part of a vast, intricate dance of life and death, of host and parasite. The tick is not an enemy. It is a co-star in our biological story. It is a reminder that we are not separate from the natural world. We are a part of it, and we are in a very real way defined by our relationship to it. This leads us to a strange and little-known scientific fact about the human microbiome. The human body is not a single organism. It is a vast, bustling ecosystem of trillions of bacteria, fungi, and other microorganisms that live on our skin and in our guts. The number of these microbial cells is thought to outnumber our own human cells by a factor of 10 to 1. We are in a very real sense a walking, breathing planet. The tick in its own quiet way reminds us of this profound truth. It is a parasite, yes, but it is also a part of a larger ecosystem that we are a part of. It is a reminder that we are not alone, that we are a part of a vast interconnected web of life that we are only just beginning to understand. This raises a deep philosophical question. What is the true nature of solitude? We often think of solitude as a state of being alone, of being separate from others. But the tick in its quiet efficiency reminds us that we are never truly alone. We are constantly in a state of communion with a million different life forms, both inside and outside our bodies. We are a part of a grand cosmic tapestry of life, and our story is inextricably linked to the stories of a million other creatures, both big and small. The truth is, we don't really know for sure. It's a question that has haunted philosophers and mystics for millennia, and in this thought experiment, it becomes a deeply personal, terrifying, and immediate problem. The world is becoming a funhouse mirror, and you are the only one left to look into it. And so the journey comes to an end. We began in a moment of surreal imagination, a quiet thought experiment about a million tiny travelers on the shores of our skin. We journeyed into the body's deepest secrets, exploring the chaotic river of blood, the mind's fractured fortress, and the silent, long decay of individual cells. We saw the heart as a trembling drum, the lungs as delicate sails, and the tick as a tiny mirror. We came to understand that our biology is not a simple linear story, but a grand, complex, and poetic narrative, a conversation with the great unknown. I'd like to gently ask one last time, where is the place you're staying now? The time in that place at this very moment, how is it flowing? In this quiet moment, I invite you to bring your awareness back to the gentle hum of your own breath, to the soft rhythm of your own heart. Remember that you are a part of a grand cosmic tapestry of life, and that your story in all its fragility and all its beauty is a profound and wondrous thing. Sleep well, my companion. Wherever and whenever you are, sweet dreams.